The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong, one of the first self-pub books ever reviewed here on the channel, and the book that introduced me to the indie publishing scene, inspiring me to publish my own book the same way. I have long and eagerly awaited the follow-up from M.L. Wong, Blood over Bright Haven. But this begs the question, just how good is the follow-up to The Sword of Kaigen? It was good. Pretty good. Not a great read, in my opinion, and not a horrible one, though I understand absolutely how this is going to fall in the territory of being some people's total taste and just absolutely not the palate of others. And that's because there is easy angles to criticize of Blood over Bright Haven, but if it is something you are seeking out, those same things could be like, oh, so satisfying to come across. I actually even have quite a bit to say about Blood over Bright Haven's reception, but first let's go ahead and set up what this story be, because we are following a newly raised high mage named Siona, the first female high mage within this order that kind of run a society that is built around these like various realms where people are coming in from another and being taken in as refugees, but treated as like second-class citizens, which is of course reflective of like, you know, so much of real-world history. And the theming in this book is just flat out along the lines you expect for a world that is built around having things like refugees and a first female high mage. This is about intersectional discrimination and has a lot to say about that. And the antagonists you're going to be introduced to are going to be pretty typical for antagonists you're going to come across around sci-fi fantasy books that are so focused on themes like this. You have overtly sexist assholes, you have the fake ally versus the ally who, yeah, is actually kind of working towards a similar cause, because they're both coming from different angles of being oppressed by this society. Now, M.L. Wong, though, in their commentary on what they're talking about here, does get insightful and nuanced, while also remaining fairly blunt. And this kind of gets into what I'm talking about in the reception of this book, because one of my like least favorite things I can see a reviewer do is say because something is blunt, therefore it is bad, specifically when it comes to its messaging, which I entirely disagree with, and especially like the modern review space only ever really see put forward, specifically when a material is talking about discrimination specifically. I can list off 1,000 movies and books that are just as blunt in their messaging, but because it is not this hyper talked about topic now, people do not claim it is bad because it's blunt. I can understand being tired of coming across these topics. Sure, we're all allowed to be burnt out on various things. That's fine. But it's just the specific implication that because blunt, therefore bad, that I like hardcore disagree with. Wolf of Wall Street, Full Metal Jacket, V for Vendetta, Snowpiercer, Apocalypse Now, all stories that I would consider as blunt as Blood over Bright Haven is, but no one's turning around to go like, that's bad because they stated the theme pretty overtly. It's just not a great angle of the criticism here, though I do have some criticisms of specifically how M.L. Wong, while they are getting like really into the deep roots of how intersectional oppression works, and specifically things like the patriarchy, still kind of fumbled the ball in some places, specifically when it came to just flat out repetition, which is different than being blunt, but the amount of times that there are just certain things around ego or sexism just overtly said by characters in the dialogue, that is where I was like, okay.
When a thing is redundant, it is eliminated.
Getting a little bit of the feeling here that we could have used a slightly softer brush. While I do not want to detract from the fact that Blood over Bright Haven, though, is getting really deep into these topics and is not pulling its punches, especially when it comes to like what false allyship is and what can cause it. Because my favorite antagonist in this story actually kind of falls into this fold of someone who has like twisted their worldview and mind so much to believe they are doing good by like propping up someone while not addressing the actual like harder fights to have, which is something you see in modern society a lot. Kind of just summing up this part of the review, I'll just say subtlety is not what Blood over Bright Haven is trying to go for, and if that's not your style, great. just try to differentiate for yourself if that's because of the topic or because of a stylistic thing. And when it comes to me, I actually think it did work for the book overall, especially because it's trying to go so deep. I just wish that ML Wong had trusted us, the reader, a little bit to not need as many things overtly said to us directly in the dialogue again and again as much. And it kind of leaves this taste in my mouth that Blood Over Brighthaven, well, it could go down a bit much now, like, okay, this is a little too much like I'm reading in the news. A few decades from now, maybe even less time from that, it might even be seen more positively as a fantasy book that was indicative of changes that are happening in society and, you know, feel more like a moment in this genre that has always been political, like all the way back in its roots, looking at things like Don Quixote or Dante's Inferno, and kind of be like, okay, yeah, it was in that vein, as opposed to now where some people might be like, look, I'm living this, I don't want to read it. That's going to take me to the world building though, and where I feel Blood Over Brighthaven could have actually used a little bit bigger of a page count, because when it comes to world building, one of my least favorite things, and this is a personal preference for sure, when it comes to epic fantasy, is it feels like the world building, all of it is like bare bones to serve a story. And Blood Over Brighthaven, like, you kind of got most of the world building I was talking about with just that setup, and there's not too much beyond that in terms of it feeling like hyper lean. And some people are gonna love that, but for me, it kind of makes it feel like a iceberg without much depth below it. There wasn't a whole lot done here to further flesh out a world that I felt like could go much far beyond what we are told directly in the pages. And that can be applied to the magic system, though ML Wong's strengths as an author do a lot to make up for what could be lacking with the magic system, because ML Wong is really smart with their creative choices and a talented writer. And so the magic system is kind of just captivating with how it is written. And there's this hyper utilitarian angle to it, which, you know, world building, magic system, two different categories. I like how much it played directly into the themes and the story going on, and it made the motivations and the characterization of Siona feel all the more powerful, because we are seeing this magic system as just flooding everything, because that is the life Siona lives. She is someone who is just inundated in magic within this society, and the fact that it becomes so integral to every facet of how this society functions does nothing to raise the stakes as we get the twists and turns of the narrative revealed as the story goes on.
As I live and breathe.
And before we talk about specifically Siona and character, which is the strongest element of this book, period, in my opinion, I want to get a little more into the actual broader narrative. There are moments that I think are like near 10 out of 10, just like awesome, especially the ending of Blood Over Brighthaven. I was actually feeling much weaker on the book up until about the last 20%, but because there is such a commitment to actually following through on a lot of the threat that is set up throughout Blood Over Brighthaven, the best part of the book is the final 20%. It feels high stakes, it feels dangerous, like there's consequences, and a little bit ambiguous, which was absolutely the right creative call here in terms of how everything is going to play out based on these characters' really massive calls. And we also are seeing some of these calls not really possibly be the right ones, depending on the long-term arc of justice in this world, which, like, I don't want there to be a sequel to this book, but it makes my mind ponder a lot about where this world and story is going to end up going. So I think the intent was very clear, and the execution of that intent was damn near flawless for the ending. The most I can say without getting into spoilers is there's like an Ozymandias touch to this ending, but flipped in a fun way, that actually had me like kind of pacing around as I was reading it, going like, oh shit. Yet, getting to that point, it's again just kind of some of the hitting the rails, like we're just gonna do the beats and steps you might expect in a story like this. Like there's a scene where someone's disguised as a servant and they should be caught, but the upper class doesn't really pay too much attention to servants, so they're able to slip by, and it's like, all right, I've seen that a lot before. Which takes me finally to actually just talking about the main character, Siona, and everyone around her. ML Wong always been a great character writer, and only maybe possibly the one angle that's improved from Sword of Kaigen. I actually think I may enjoy Siona the most of any of this author's cast of characters, which is saying a lot, but it's because they are so intentionally flawed. And one of the biggest mistakes I think you can make as an author when trying to write a story that's so based in intersectionalism, social justice, discrimination, is to make your protagonist not flawed. Siona is incredibly flawed, admittedly so. In fact, it becomes one of those things that could arguably be over-addressed in the text, but not in a way that actually affects the characterization that's going on, because they have a big ego. They want to be like a big person in history. They want their name on the record. And as I said in the basic setup that you'll see on like any pitch for this book, yes, they're already the first female high mage, but they're immediately trying to be put down and discredited by the assholes around them. And Siona's response to that is very relatable, like human and angry, but also there are missteps there and not seeing past certain misgivings that could have allowed to a a more possible smooth path to the resolution. And we kind of get to this point where there are huge ramifications happening throughout society for some things that have been learned and truths revealed. And the reaction we get from that from the main character is up there with like some of my favorite oh damn realizations of I may have like gone too far. I'll never know if I have, but hey, I'm here, I gotta commit, which is like a specific thing, obviously, but we've seen it a lot, especially here on the channel in recent books I've read. Sun Eater comes to mind, and I think Stormlight Archive even has a nice example of this, where it's like, in for a penny, in for a pound.
In for a penny, in for a pound.
But Siona kind of has this, oh, this isn't the response I thought, and this deep like self-loathing that develops, yet they know they're not wrong, and so you end up with this really complex emotional turmoil that is a direct through line to why the ending works really, really well. And this takes me to talking about Siona's assistant, Thamiel? I think that's how you say it, and the different perspective we actually get from this character. And I think that is probably what ended up making the world building enter like the fine territory for me, rather than just like, this was a problem. That's because, again, through character and through specifically a paternal subplot that's going on with Thamiel, we begin to feel a culture angle here that does a ton of work to actually make this world feel lived in, and like the conflict is more human than what we would have got, I feel like, if we just stayed with Siona. And the commentary we end up getting from a character who is, I would say, less flawed overall than Siona also kind of makes some of the more messaging that is subtle going on actually kind of touch down more gently at the end over Blood Over Brighthaven. And it becomes more about the long-term fight, someone who is like in an angle where they know these problems cannot be solved in a day, versus like Siona's kind of like hot-headed, egotistical place in history approach, which is just like, I'm doing the thing. And that conflict actually ends up being what brings these characters together. And that's the kind of work from ML Wong that's going to make me like always be a fan of them. They understand the human emotional relationships that can happen between two people who are technically in conflict, yet working together and execute on that premise like few in the industry today. And I would say specifically if you're looking to write complex relationships, I would recommend Blood Over Brighthaven as something to study as an author, because that is probably, that relationship is one of the few elements of this book that I would be like, oh, that's a 10. Like that specific relationship dynamic I loved. And I think while there are some corny moments that, again, I'm like, oh, okay, he did the thing where he punched the sexist asshole, that lack of subtlety is almost entirely undone by how much nuance is actually put into these characters and their internal dialogue that we jump back and forth between, seeing how much they're both struggling with this genuinely horrific circumstance they have to live in. The first 80% of this book, I was feeling like a 5 to 6, but with how solid the ending of Blood Over Brighthaven is, I actually think I'm going to take the book as a whole up to a really solid 7. I think it is good. I think specifically if the things I've talked about interest you, it could be ranked even higher for you. I think this might be some people's like favorite book of the year. It's also going to be one that some people just bounce hardcore off of. I mean, politically, I agree with like nearly everything Blood Over Brighthaven is saying. It is just also like I've had to stop watching the news as much recently because my brain gets sad. And so getting into this when I'm trying to go for escapism can be a little bit like, oh, not the escapism I want. Squarespace is an amazing all-in-one website platform designed to help get your business on a roll. Whether you're just starting out or scaling your business, Squarespace gives you everything you need. Claim your domain, grow your brand, and get paid. all in one place. Get discovered fast with Squarespace's integrated SEO tools, which are more crucial today than ever, trust me. So you show up more often in search engines and bring in more of your ideal customers. Squarespace also makes it easy to showcase your skills with video content on your website. Create a stunning video library for your clients to peruse, and even monetize your content by adding a paywall, a perfect option for anyone offering online courses, exclusive tutorials, or premium workshops. And did I mention they allow you to fundraise with built-in donation tools on their website? They make it easy to engage supporters and accept one-time as well as recurring contributions. Email campaigns, marketing tools, and appointment scheduling make connecting with your community a breeze. And for anyone who does not have a background like myself in coding, Squarespace's professional design templates got you covered. So head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Daniel Green and use my code Daniel Green to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now go on and get your business up and running today. So I'm going to briefly talk about spoilers. If you do not want spoilers for Blood Over Brighthaven, click on off, get out of here. You have 3, 2, 1, go. Bomb. Like just detonates with a big bloom, and then the people have to go off, and possibly there's going to be a brighter future. But that's an important note of Blood Over Brighthaven. Siona dies in this sacrifice, and in her mind, she's done the most she can for this horrific situation. Thaumael, though, knows that this is the beginning of a new struggle, and the end note of Blood Over Brighthaven, seeing him go off with these new people into a land they're not sure if they're going to be able to conquer as the barrier expands, and immediately seeing like some superstition around it that isn't entirely accurate, informs us, the reader, so much in terms of like the truth is not going to be entirely known. The steps forward are not going to be clean and easy. And as a whole, this is still going to be like a tremendous endeavor, because in the real world, that is just true. To take like the most obvious extreme example, after World War II ended, the Jewish people did not just go, well, everything's fine, right? Pain, conflict, generational trauma are kind of like the end notes that the themes of this book bleed into, that intelligently are not tried to be like fully addressed, but at the same time are partially what draw us, the reader, into wanting to imagine more, to continue this story on our own. And to me, that's a great storyteller. Yeah, as a whole, I have criticisms, but I still think Blood Over Brighthaven is technically, in terms of its concept and execution, really impressive, and is keeping me a big fan of not only this style of storytelling, but Mel Wong as a whole. But let me know what you think of Blood Over Brighthaven in the comments down below. This was one where like I was sad reading it. I was having a hard time at certain points, but I was continually drawn back to picking it up. And despite having to take a couple week break recently for obvious reasons, while I was reading it, I was just burning through it. Anyway, like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.